Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining today. We will get started in just a few minutes to allow everybody to enter the Zoom room. All right, it looks like we've got everybody in. So good afternoon. My name is Vanessa. I'm a qualitative specialist here at Statistics Solutions. And today I'm going to be presenting to you all on writing your qualitative results chapter and really being able to confidently present the results and the analysis from your respective projects. So this webinar will be helpful to students who are in the process of working on their dissertations, and specifically those who are doing a study that is using a qualitative methodology. We also have a number of resources available related to different traditions. So we've got webinars for quantitative methods. We also have webinars for mixed method studies. We also help students and provide resources for the different areas of the dissertation. So if you're someone who is just in the early stages, you're still in that topic development phase, or working on your introduction, literature search, writing your methods, or if you're further along and it's time for you to analyze your results or write up your discussion, we do help with all of these different pieces. We also assist with preparation for both the proposal and defense. So preparing to do those PowerPoint presentations and carry out your presentations. We also assist with that too. So today I'll go through this chapter here, but just know that if you are looking for more resources, we can help point you in those directions. So just to get us started, the components that we would expect to see in a qualitative results chapter include the introduction, setting, demographics, data collection, data analysis, results, trustworthiness, and summary. Now, this is a pretty comprehensive list. From working with students, we've seen that these are the components that students are more, or I guess most frequently reporting in their sections. One important note here is that you should always check in with your school or your reviewers to identify if there are any templates or checklists that they would like you to follow to complete your paper. This list is a great place to start, but just make sure you're checking in with your reviewers so that you know exactly what's required of you as you begin your writing as well. We also have a dissertation template as a resource that we provide. So if you don't have one available to you and you're not sure where to start, our template tells you what the different sections are and what should go into them. So that'll cover the entire dissertation, whereas today I'm just going to cover the results chapter. So as we go through this presentation, remember at this point, you would have collected all of your data, you would have completed all of your study methods, and now you are just presenting kind of the facts and figures about what individuals who participated in your study said. So this is not a place where we are providing a lot of interpretation. Rather, we're just providing some, sorry, I'm just reading the chat here. I forgot to mention that I will go through the chat at the end. So if you have questions that I haven't answered just yet, I will coming up. So back to what I was saying, in this section, you're going to be explaining what people said. And to do that, you're going to be using quotes from the data that you've collected. So actual participant words and kind of a brief summary type of information related to what they're saying, reiterating what they're saying. The goal here is really to show what the experiences that participants shared were, how these are similar or different across the participants in your study, and to synthesize these. So you may mention something about participant 1 and then also draw parallels to their experience and participant 7. So kind of just pulling together all those pieces and seeing how this data relates to one another. So to start, you're going to begin with a brief introduction. This is very similar to all the other chapters in the dissertation. So the first step is to reorient the reader to your study. Remember here that by the time they've gotten to this chapter, they've already read through your introduction, your methods, your literature search, your data analysis plan. So they've read through quite a bit, and you just need to remind them exactly what it is that you're doing. So here you're going to restate the problem and the purpose of your study, and also reorient the reader to your research questions. In doing this, I strongly recommend that you use the verbatim language that you've used throughout the document. This is going to ensure that there's no ambiguity or confusion with your reviewers as to what it is you're studying. You just want to make sure that you're being very clear and not manipulating your words in a way that makes them think that the project is misaligned in any way. So you'll reorient them, and then you're going to provide a preview of what's going to be coming up in the chapter. So to do that, you may say, in this chapter, the researcher will present and then provide kind of this, a list of the different subheadings that are going to be shown in the chapter. So you're giving them that look back and a brief look forward so they know what to expect as they continue reading on. Next, you're going to go into the setting. So think of this here as providing the context for people to understand your results. Before they can understand what people said, they need to understand in what context they said it and also who said it. So to start, you're going to talk about the setting for your study. So where did you conduct this research? Why was this the appropriate setting to conduct this research? And here you should consider and report any conditions that may have influenced your research or the participants. So for example, if you are a 5th grade teacher and you are conducting a study at your local school, where you are interviewing your colleagues or you're interviewing teachers in a different department, that's important to note here. We should know that kind of the context around how you became engaged with these participants is, and also why this setting is being used for your study. Next, you'll talk about anything that may have impacted the interpretation of your results. So for example, if you did know the individuals that you were interviewing, or if you had a professional relationship with these people and you were interviewing them in maybe the school setting where they work, that may be important to note because it could have implications for how they've answered the questions that were asked of them. So this is very, I would say, personal to your study, but just creatively think here about, okay, based on the modality or the setting that I conducted my research, is there anything that could have impacted the results? Is there anything that the reader needs to know in order to really understand the next steps? So another example could be, I worked on a study where we were interviewing women who were experiencing homelessness. And in that study, we interviewed them at their at the shelter that they were living at the time. So that may be an important a factor to mention as well. You know, this is their not only where we're conducting the interview, but it's where they are living at the time. It may speak to their level of comfortability with the different questions that we're talking about as well. Next, you are going to talk about the demographics of your participants. So we talked about the where. Here, we're going to be talking about the who. So this is where you're going to be providing information about the participants, including any relevant demographic characteristics. So, for example, if you are doing a study where you want to understand the perceptions of women who give birth in the United States. For that study, of course, one relevant demographic is that they are going to be people who identify as women. They would have had to have given birth in order to participate in your study. So here you might describe the distribution of some characteristics related to those really key variables. You may say the average age of the women who participated in your study. Maybe you can say how long ago they gave birth to understand how recent the experience that they're describing is. Another example, if you're doing a study in a school and you're trying to understand professional development opportunities available to teachers, you may want to describe how long someone has been teaching, maybe how long they've been at that particular school, how many opportunities to receive professional development that they are reporting. So some of these things may be important. And again, this is very specific to your study. So just think through here. What do they need to know about my participants? Do they need to know how old they are? Do they need to know what their socioeconomic status is? What information is going to be pertinent to the results? One way that you can present this demographic data is in a table format. So I recommend writing some sort of narrative paragraph where you are highlighting the key points of this demographic information. So you might say the majority of participants were over the age of 50, or you might say the average income among participants was XYZ. So kind of give that summary. And then in a table format, present the actual numbers and the distribution of the participants. So one note here too, in order to do this, you need to make sure that you have a very structured way to collect this information. So I think a lot of times with qualitative studies, since we're so focused on collecting the textual data, we forget to go back and collect some basic demographic information. So if it's possible for your study, I recommend always having some sort of brief questionnaire where you're at least getting maybe the age, maybe the education level. So some of these really basic characteristics that may be important to report. And again, you can also collect additional characteristics that are relevant to the particular phenomenon or cultural context that you're studying. Here on the bottom here, I've mentioned participant sketches or profiles. So as you are describing your sample, It's also really important in a qualitative study to make sure that you are obscuring the data in a way that your participant's identity is not going to be given away by the description you've developed. So we do want a really good description, but make sure that you're using pseudonyms, you're using participant IDs when possible, so we're not including the participant names. And if you are going to report kind of individual level characteristics, so for example, if you're going to report participant 1 was a 42-year-old female, she was African-American, third grade teacher at this school district, like if you're going to get down to that level, which a lot of people do, just make sure you are obscuring the data in a way that someone who may be familiar with the school district that you're working in or the group that you're working with wouldn't be able to pick that up and say, oh, okay, well, I know that there's only one 43-year-old Black woman in the third grade department at my school. So you might instead say participant 1 was under the age of 50, identified as African-American, and taught K through 12. So we're still including the information, but we're just manipulating it a little bit so that there's kind of some room to just, not really pinpoint exactly who that is, but we're getting an idea of who this person is in terms of what they do, but we're just still protecting their confidentiality and their information there. So just kind of think through that as well. Next, you're going to talk about the data collection. So here you want to describe the amount of data that you've collected. So first you'll talk about the number of participants you've collected from. So how many people did you conduct a qualitative interview with? How many people were included in your focus groups? If you did a document analysis, how many documents did you analyze? You'll also want to include the frequency and the duration of your time of your data collection events. So if you did qualitative interviews, maybe for the first participant, you spent 90 minutes, and then for the second, you spent 60. So this could be some interesting information to share as well. Personally, when I present this, I use a table format again, and I provide the participant ID in one column. Then in the next column, I say how many minutes the interview was. And then in the following column, I say how many pages of transcripts the interview generated. So that's just something I like to do to give an idea of exactly what the breadth of data was that was being analyzed for this study. But there's different ways to do this. You can also just write this in a narrative format. It's really up to your preference. You will also want to talk about how the data was recorded. So you most likely had a plan for this that you developed and proposed in your chapter 3. Here, basically, you just want to explain if you were doing interviews, how did you move that experience into some sort of documented format that you could prepare or that you would prepare for analysis. So this can be as simple as I had my recorder on during the interview. After I audio recorded each data collection event, I sent the recording to a transcription company and used that transcription or used that transcript to then analyze the data. This process looks different for everybody. It's really dependent on the resources that you have available to you, whether that's time or if you have the funds to send your things off to be transcribed. Some helpful tips that I offer to students are Zoom transcription can be a really helpful tool. Basically, you can record to the cloud on Zoom and it will generate a transcript for you. Another option is Otter AI. That's a website that will also record and transcribe for you. So those are some options if you don't want to go the transcription company route. And then you can always do it yourself. So you can record and then you can spend the time to transcribe your recordings if you have the time for that as well. All of these methods, regardless of what you do, whether it's a transcription company, you do it yourself, or you use some sort of software, I just recommend going through and spot checking every single transcript, because it's going to save you a lot of time in the data analysis portion of your study if you're going in with really clean transcripts. I can't tell you how many times I've been analyzing data and then I get to a spot in the transcript and it says crosstalk, or it says unclear language, and then I have to go back and listen to the recording, and it really is a bit of a time suck. So if you can front load that work, make sure you are going in with really clean transcripts. It's just going to kind of put you a little bit further in the process. Another great option, if there are graduate students or undergraduate students at your institution who are looking to gain experience in research and kind of reach the level of student that you would want working on this with you, this is a great opportunity for them to see what the qualitative data analysis process is like. So that may be another opportunity for you to kind of prioritize some of your tasks, but also get this work done at the same time. So just some options there. If you differ from your plan of data collection at all, here you'll want to describe that as well. So I think the biggest example of this we saw in the last few years was people intended on collecting their interviews in person and meeting with participants face to face, but due to the pandemic, they had to pivot and instead meet over Zoom or phone call. So things happen, you know, things change. It's not uncommon in research for anything to change, really. It's very common. So this is just the place where you would report back and explain where you differed from your original plan, and provide some justification for why the decisions that you made in your new plan are make sense for your study. Right. So the root of all of this is that we want to make sure that we're making defendable choices that are rooted in research, and really rooted in this process and being true to the nature of qualitative research. So as long as you can defend those choices, you'll be in good shape in this section. Now, if there was anything unusual that happened during your data collection, so for example, the pandemic was a very unusual situation, you may want to mention that as well. Or if the site that you were recruiting at, maybe they said, we can't allow you to recruit anymore. That I've seen that happen as well, specifically with school districts. Sometimes they just kind of close off that pipeline. So if anything like that happens, you'll want to report that too, because most likely you're going to have to pivot and start recruiting somewhere else or whatever it may be. So just think through those things as well here. Next, you're going to talk about your data analysis process. So here's where you're going to talk about how you moved that transcript of information from just raw text into codes and then ultimately themes. So here you have a few options as well. You can do your coding by hand, where you're printing out your transcripts, or maybe you're having them in Word files and you are manually coding. So maybe you're using a highlighter or just using Word to look through and identify common statements or significant statements throughout the transcripts. And then once you do that, you're going through and trying to group those commonalities together into larger themes to understand what the overall findings are in this data. That's one option. Another option is to use a qualitative data analysis software to do this same exact process, but it has a few different features that may be helpful to you. So one benefit to the qualitative data analysis software is that you're able to look across all of the transcripts. So you will be able to see, okay, I coded positive experience 10 times in transcript 1, 13 times in transcript 2, 15 times in transcript 3. So it just gives you that kind of larger bird's eye view that may be a little bit more challenging if you're printing out your information. But I guess take that with a grain of salt, because if you build out a very good tracking system for your coding, if you do it in Word or by paper, like through Excel, then you may be able to track that as well. So this is really dependent on comfort level, whether or not a qualitative software is going to be the best choice for you. I personally really, I really see the benefit to it. I never code by hand. A few softwares that I see students using are In Vivo, Deduce, MaxQDA, Atlas TI. We also have a blog post on our website. So if you are curious, but not sure what the best way to go about analyzing your data is, we can share that link so that you have some more information to help you make the best decision for yourself. So you'll describe that process, and then you will describe and define the codes that you have identified through that process. So to talk about the codes and the categories and the themes, I typically, again, use a table to provide an overview of what the results were and a hierarchy of that thematic structure. So I think it's really important to show exactly what codes contributed to what themes, to show that there is some differentiation between the themes. And then, of course, you will also present this further in depth in the next section. Next, you'll talk about any discrepant or negative cases that may have risen in your data. So it's very uncommon that all participants are going to have the same exact experience or say the same things, and that is totally okay. Here, you'll just talk about how you handled those discrepant cases. So I think one good strategy is to discuss them in the context of the theme where they were present. So for example, if you're doing a study where you want to understand the professional development opportunities or the perception of the professional development opportunities among a group of teachers, and you have 4 teachers saying that they had the most amazing experience, they were able to go to a number of courses and really hone their professional development skills through their school. And then you have 1 participant saying, I had none of these opportunities available to me. Well, it's really interesting and curious that this 1 person had that experience. So we do want to talk about it. And that's kind of where this discrepant case comes in. You'll still talk about it, but I recommend talking about it in the context of that larger theme. So you may say, participants 1 through 4 expressed great satisfaction with their opportunities to seek professional development. Whereas participant 5 had a very different experience. And then you'll also include illustrative quotes to support your statements here. So I liken this process of reporting the actual themes and the data to writing the literature search. This is a lot of synthesis. You're looking across to see kind of those big picture themes. The goal here is not to say participant 1 said, I liked the opportunities. Participant 2 said XYZ. You don't want to go through each one at a time. You really want to identify those key points across all of them to show that convergence and divergence in experiences. Now, in terms of formatting, this section should be formatted by either research question or by the category or theme. This is really dependent on the way that your study is structured. So you have some opportunities or some choices to make here with what makes the most sense for you. And it also depends on the way that you answered your research questions. So if every single research question has a theme corresponding to it, then maybe organizing this by research question makes sense. If instead of that, you just looked across your data, identified key themes that kind of fit into one overarching research question, then you might just present by category or theme. So here it's, again, dependent on your particular study. When you are presenting the data, you should mostly use your own words. So here we are going to pull in participant quotes, and use their own words. You can use block quotes, you can use short quotes, you can even use just single words. So you might say, the participant said the professional development opportunities were, and then in quotes, put a single word. So you have some flexibility in how you use their words, but the goal is to also really use and describe what they're saying in your own words. So you want to summarize the statements that you are plugging in. You want to do that synthesis. So participant 1 said X, Y, Z. This was very similar to the sentiment expressed by participant 2, who said A, B, C, something like this, where you're kind of pulling across kind of like a mind map and really showing all of the connections between what everyone was saying. If you are doing a study like an ethnography or grounded theory study, it may be appropriate to use excerpts from documents or photographs that were collected in the field as a part of your research. So that may be an option that's available to you as well. And then some schools will ask you to interpret the results here in this presentation of the data. They may have an evaluation of the findings section in your results chapter. That's very similar to what you would see in a discussion. Some will want you to save that for the discussion chapter. So this is going to be dependent on your template. I think a general rule of thumb is to save the interpretation for the discussion, but I have seen a few schools that have an evaluation of the findings section, or they split up their results in a theoretical analysis and a thematic analysis, where you are specifically speaking to how your data answered your theory, and then in a different section answering what themes emerged. So just make sure you know what is required of you so that you can best write this section. And then, of course, the last point here is that this should be written in a very clear and logical format. So remember that at the point of you writing this, you would have been immersed in the data for maybe months, maybe longer, analyzing it, collecting it, talking to the participants, thinking about it. So you would have spent a good amount of time with this data, but this is the first time that the reader is seeing it. So although something may be apparent to you, or you've made connections in your mind already regarding certain topics or expressions, you really want to hold the reader's hand and kind of lead them to that conclusion, or lead them to the water, so to speak. So just think about taking it step by step. One way that you can do this, or kind of practice doing this, is to have people who are not familiar with your research read the results, ask them if it makes sense. Again, just trying to hold their hand through it. So if you have maybe friends or colleagues who would be willing to read your work, ask them if there's any gaps, anything that doesn't make sense, and that's just going to improve the overall quality of your writing. The second to last section that you'll talk about is the trustworthiness. So here is where you're explaining why the findings of this study are transferable, dependable, confirmable, and also credible. So here we are explaining how we know that the information that was collected is trustworthy. How do we know that the process that we went through to analyze the information was also a trustworthy process? So when you're analyzing this data, you are going to be reading long pages of transcripts. You're going to be applying codes to different participant statements. So how are you ensuring that you are doing that in an equitable way, in a consistent way, right? So if you're using the code satisfied, and the way that you've used it in the first transcript is the participant said, I loved the opportunity, right? And then maybe in the second transcript, you're using that code satisfied again, but this time the statement is the opportunity was okay. You just want to think critically here about how can I ensure that I'm applying these codes in the same manner, and I'm pulling the same information from each of these themes, or to develop each of these themes. This is going to help with the rigor of your study as well, and just ensure that you're really using a systematic process to analyze the data. Bracketing may also be helpful. So because of the nature of a qualitative study, we bring a lot of ourselves to the research. I'm sure that many of you are, I hope, studying topics that are important to you or that you're passionate about. And because of that, you probably have a number of opinions or thoughts or background knowledge related to those topics. Here, we want to make sure that in the results, the views of the participants are what's shining through. So how are you as the researcher not inserting yourself into your results, or how are you not swaying them or presenting them in a way that conforms to your predetermined thoughts or your preconceived thoughts? So some things that you can do to avoid that are using an audit trail. So as you begin applying your code book, take note of the way that you're applying it. You might also enlist another coder, so another person to objectively code the data and see if you have some iterative reliability. Are you coding things in the same way? Are there differences in how you're interpreting codes? And if there are, how can you better refine your code book to really ensure that you are maintaining consistency in your analysis process? I think it's important to note that this process is very iterative. So you're most likely not unless you have some sort of predetermined theory or predetermined codes, you're most likely not going to go in with one code book and keep that code book from start to finish. We would expect that there is new information coming in, new ideas emerging from the transcripts that are going to require you to either add codes, change the codes that you have, or to create decision rules around the codes that you're using. So, for example, I analyzed a study where we were looking at the experiences or the thoughts of women who use cannabis while pregnant. A lot of the women were talking about, or asking questions rather, related to their hospital specific concerns. So they would say, I'm giving birth at this hospital, will they drug test me when I give birth? We also saw a lot of women asking state specific questions. So I live in the state of Georgia. What are the rules around CPS regarding my cannabis use? So we had to make some decisions here on how we would differentiate between these codes. If it was important to differentiate between state specific or hospital specific, we just really had to talk as a team to determine what this meant. So ultimately, if they reported down to the hospital level, we just left it at hospital. We didn't double code it with state. And then if they reported at the state level with no mention of hospital, we coded it at state level. So it's kind of a very simple solution, but again, sitting down and making those decision rules helped us make sure that we were coding the same across all of the documents. And then when we developed our themes, we were sure that the themes meant what we thought they meant based on the earlier work that we did. So you will most likely each need to go through some sort of process like this where you're thinking about how you're going to be applying these codes. One more thing, actually, I want to mention on the trustworthiness there. There is a checklist for qualitative research. It's called the Core Q. And I can put a link in the chat if anyone is interested in that. But it is a helpful tool to kind of look through and make sure that you are reporting your research in a rigorous way. So it stands for Consolidated Criteria for Reporting Qualitative Research. And the checklist is very comprehensive. It's a great thought exercise, and it's a good reminder as you're writing. So some of the things in the checklist are, some very basic things like, are you reporting your method of approach? Are you reporting your sampling strategy? But with regards to the analysis and the findings, Things like the number of coders that are coding the data, including a description of the coding tree, talking about the software that you used or any participant checking procedures. Those are all really good pieces to include to ensure that your chapter is comprehensive and it is detailed enough that the reader gets a good idea of the rigor of the study. So once you've done that, you will go on to summarize the chapter. So to do that, you will provide a highlight of the findings. Here, you're going to be moving into the discussion. So I recommend placing larger emphasis on those points that you really want to move forward and expand on in your discussion. So you will summarize what you've talked about, and then you will transition the reader into the next chapter. And then once you've done that, you will have completed your results chapter. So that is the end of my slides for today. I will open it up for questions. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer those. If you have questions that are very specific to your study, that you think I might need more information about what you're doing or what your research questions are or who you're collecting data from, I'll put my email address in the chat and you can feel free to shoot me an email and we can talk through those as well. We also offer a free 30-minute consultation. So if you think that you might benefit from services, whether that be an hourly service or a full workup, so like a full results chapter, don't hesitate to reach out. We love to talk to you all about your research and identify the ways that we can help if we can. All right, so let me open up the chat and see some of these questions here. Okay, I see that someone wants the Core Q checklist. So let me go ahead and grab that from my internet browser. One moment. Okay, I'm going to put the Core Q checklist in the chat. Again, this is just a great tool to remind yourself of important information that you should be including in your chapter. All right, what else do we have here? Can we have a copy of this presentation? Yes, absolutely. You'll all receive a copy within 24 to 48 hours of both the slides and the recording. If you look, Sierra has posted a number of links in the chat. One of those is our free dissertation webinars. So I mentioned earlier, we do webinars for all of the chapters. We also do webinars on different statistical analysis if you're needing that help. So you all have access to those as well. You can check those out through that link. You are welcome. Have a great day. Kimberly, I see you've asked a question related to repeating the setting, demographic, and data collection subsettings. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by repeating? Do you mean that you presented it in chapter 3 and so you're wondering if it should be included again in chapter 4? In the meantime, I see that there's a question about how to access the slides. These will be emailed to you, and I will put again in this chat the link to all of our slides. So that link will take you to all of the slides that we do. And if you don't have questions, thank you guys so much for joining today. I wish you all the best of luck as you are working on your papers, and I hope that we see you again in the next session. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you, Margaret.